the distinguished participants, our faculty members, and our senior sir, Prithvi Raj Legal sir, former Vice Chairman, National Planning Commission, our presenter, Dr. Juni Singh, and all other my fellows and students. Okay, this is a continuation of our CEDinar monthly seminar, and which is organized by our department, Central Department of Economics, Tribhuvan University. Before this pandemic, we used to have it weekly, but during this situation, we are organizing once in a month, so it has been a monthly seminar. Okay, and this CEDECON seminar, or which we generally call CEDinar, it is a platform to share your empirical works, either ongoing or recently completed, which are related mostly in economics. And we have organized this platform with the hoping that it provides a good opportunity for wider and effective dissemination of your ongoing or recently completed research works. On the other hand, our faculties, students, and other interested scholars acquaint and equipped with innovative research ideas, tools, and methods disseminated by our distinguished presenter. In this sense, CEDinar has dual benefits. So we always welcome you to share your research works through this platform. And anyone of you, if you are interested, then so that you can use this platform as a common platform. Now, before we proceed to the formal presentation, please allow me to brief today's program. We'll have presentation from our guest for about 30 to 35 minutes. After presentation, we'll have question and answer session for 20 to 25 minutes. During this program, please help us by keeping your microphone mute during mute. You can unmute if you wish to have a short clarification during the presentation or any question related to presentation during the question and answer session. You can also put your question in chat box during or after presentation. Please do not repeat your query if it is already responded or asked by someone else. The speaker will try to respond as many as possible questions related to the presentation given the time. Today, for technical support, we'll have my respected sir, my friends Nirmal Raut and Navin Adhikari, who are joining with us, who provide technical support throughout the program. Now, without being delayed, I would like to move to today's program. So, first of all, I would like to welcome today's speaker or presenter, Dr. Juni Singh. Before I ask her to present her research, I take this opportunity to introduce her briefly. Juni Singh has recently completed her PhD in economics, specializing in development from the Paris School of Economics, a reputed institution in the globe. Since her school days, Juni has had a passion to work for poverty alleviation, inspired by her father, and hence the choice to be an economist. She started her journey by pursuing BA Honours in Economics from St. Stephen College, Delhi. Then she moved to Paris School of Economics, where she completed her master's and PhD. And currently she is doing her postdoc, and she is now all the way from Brussels. Her current research focuses on social development using experiment and data to inform policymakers. Before starting her PhD, she worked briefly in the World Bank in Washington, D.C., focusing on poverty alleviation program. She plans to continue using her knowledge and skill set to design better policies in order to improve the welfare of communities. Her ongoing projects in Nepal include adoption of electric cooking stoves and increasing aspiration of women using role models. Today she is going to present a research paper, her research, Endogenous Institutions, or Network Experiment in Nepal, where this paper studies the demand for monitoring and its effectiveness is sustaining cooperation across social groups in the developing countries where formal institutions are mostly weak and the community who are responsible to enforce the local governments. So for detail of our presentation, let's welcome Dr. Juni Singh. Now, Dr. Singh, now it's yours.
Yes, thank you, Gurgendraji, for the wonderful introduction. Namaste, everyone. This is Juni Singh from PSC. And I'd really like to thank Sidikon and Nirmalji in particular for the invitation to present my paper, my job market paper that is titled Endogenous Institution, a Network Experiment from Nepal. So this is going to be a lab in the field experiment, which is a joint work with my co-author Julu Iacobelli, who's also a PhD student at PSC. So let me move on to what motivated us to sort of start this project. Um, so often in the absence of a strong formal institution in developing countries, in this context, Nepal, it's the local communities that are responsible for taking up community-based projects, whether it be forest user groups, poverty funds. So under such a scenario, it becomes important to understand what works well for these groups and what does not work very well. So what are the mechanisms that can sort of reinforce cooperation in these groups? So one mechanism in particular that is often used is peer monitoring. Given that it is a small community setting where almost everybody knows everybody, this has proved to be an effective mechanism to enforce cooperation. So why in particular is peer monitoring useful? So peer monitoring, the idea of peer monitoring is really to be observed by your peers in order to make sure that there is certain level of cooperation in the community. So one way that it could be useful could be because of punishment. So the peers can see your actions and punish you accordingly. But there's another channel which could be more interesting is the reputation concern channel. And there's a seminal work of Ostrom where she focuses on mechanisms based on social ties that could prove stronger than simple punishment, that could prove more effective. So it becomes important to understand this mechanism and how it works, particularly in a small village context where, given that I know that somebody is observing my action, I sort of behave in a certain manner because I know that this can affect my image in the village in the long run. So this is really the flavor of peer monitoring that we're going after. So in this paper in particular, we are going to be focusing on demand for such a monitoring system through the reputation concern channel. So it's important to understand what drives cooperation, but in particular, what drives the demand for such a mechanism, which is understudied, and we sort of aim to fill this gap with this project. So why reputation concerns, and where does this social network fit in the whole map? So reputation concerns, like I just mentioned, is important for these people because they often rely on personalized relationship for risk sharing, for public good provision, for information delivery. So they are really a close group of people. And so it becomes important to have a certain social image in the village or in the society, which is particularly is very important in these Nepali villages, as we know from our experience or the context of being in Nepal. And so in particular, social networks is an important part of the puzzle because so network is basically who are my friends and who my friends' friends are. So in such a scenario, I get influenced by what my friends think about me, but also what my friends' friends think about me. So this is where social network starts becoming more important. And so there is a literature that looks at how your position in the network can affect your actions. So if I am more central, if I'm central in the sense, if I am known by more people, I behave in a certain way, whereas if I am not very well known, I might not behave in a certain way. So we have this literature that looks at how people which are close with each other have a greater level of trust and they cooperate better, basically. So if I am friends with you, I behave in a certain manner versus if I'm interacting with a random person. And this is when you talk about behavior within friends, but if you look at behavior that is outside your sphere of social connection, so what happens when you're interacting with somebody you do not know very well. So in the literature, we have a couple of field projects that look at how we can enhance cooperation when people don't know each other well, so when they are distant pairs. And so in particular, this paper looks at how in the presence of a monitor, the cooperation could be reinforced. In particular, a monitor who's central in network terms, which is somebody who's well known in the society. So, we have this sort of baseline data, and we're trying to move one step forward with our research project. And we want to ask really, okay, this is what happens when you are assigned a monitor randomly, but what if the group is given an opportunity to choose their own monitors? So what if I tell you that you can choose your own monitor? How do you then react? And so, is there a difference in behavior with an elected monitor versus having a randomly assigned one? So, the fact that I get to choose my own monitor, does that change how I behave? And another interesting bit is to sort of understand how this behavior is different when I am with my friends in my closely knit group versus when I am with people I don't know very well, so sparse group. So, to that end, in order to answer these questions, what do we do? So just to give you a flavor of what this paper is going to be looking at. So the first step that we did was to have a network survey. So we had an extensive survey in rural Nepal. We covered 19 villages with a group of 7 enumerators. I'm going to mention in the next section more in detail what this survey consisted of. And then once we had the survey, we had the lab in the field experiment. Basically, the idea is we make people interact in certain way under certain circumstance. We make them play games and try to understand their behavior from the data that we get. And so in this case, we made them play a contribution game, which again, I'm going to mention more in detail as to what the details of the game were. And the people in this village played this game once in a group which they were very familiar with, so a dense group, and once in a group that they did not know very well, which we call sparse group. And so in order to play this contribution game, we gave these individuals a chance to elect their own monitor, like I mentioned before, which is really the key of this paper. And then we made them interact with both once monitor of their choice and once monitor of our choice. So there was this interaction within the same group, once with the monitor that they chose and once with the monitor that was randomly assigned to them. So this is in a nutshell the sort of intervention that we're going to be looking at in course of this presentation today. And so given what we do, where do we sort of see this paper and what literature does it contribute to? So there is a rich set of literature that looks at other regarding preferences. So what do I mean by other regarding preferences is basically I care not only about my utility, but also the utility of somebody else, about utility of my friends or so on and so forth. And so there are a couple of papers that look at, as you go further away in your friend list, you sort of tend to cooperate less and less because you care about these people less and less. So there's this literature on social distance, other regarding preference. And then there is another sort of literature that looks at institution and monitoring, in particular in a developing country setting with weak institutions, how network-based enforcement is very effective in reinforcing cooperation. So they have, so in this particular paper by Chandrasekhar et al., they look at with it from a network perspective. And in particular, this Dalbo paper looks at one of our main motivations is to look at how people behave when they have a monitor of their own choice versus a monitor that has been randomly assigned. So this is the Dalbo paper, and we sort of take motivation from this literature and we merge the literature on networks and monitoring with the literature on other regarding preferences. So we sort of want to make a more intensive study on how we can contribute in the gap between these two literature. And so just to give you a flavor of what is to come, in terms of how we answer the research question. So firstly, we're going to find that groups are more likely to elect a monitor if they are far away from each other. And people, if you give them an opportunity to choose their own monitor, behave more cooperatively, more so in a group where they don't know the other person very well. And there is some sort of signaling that is happening in these groups when you reveal the choice of the monitor, but only for the dense group in this case. So I'm going to present each of these aspects, the experiment, the network survey, more in detail in the study design. But before I move on to the study design, are there any questions about the first part of the presentation? No? Kogendraji, do we have any questions in particular, any clarification questions? Or?
We don't have any question from our participant. So
Okay.
please, you can go.
Okay,
Go ahead.
so let me move on to the study design. So the context, it's the experiment happens in rural Nepal, in particular Makwanpur, where we cover 19 mid-hill villages in Bajrabarahi, Palung, and Chitlang. So these villages are small with an average number of 70 households per village. And our sample is going to be only women in these villages who are between 18 and 60 years old. So there's a reason why we focus only on women, because when we did a pilot on the network survey, we realized that there were many missing men in the village given the high rate of migration, and hence we focused mostly on women. We covered around 1,500 women in total. And then we have this network survey, like I mentioned before, with a group of enumerators. So what do I mean by network survey? So this is comparatively new in the literature to sort of try to understand social links within the village. So who talks to whom, who is friends with whom, because that to a large extent determines the behavior in the village. So we had a network survey where we asked each woman in the village, so who do you take advice from? Who do you borrow money from? And in particular, we asked them to give us at least 3 connections for each of these questions. So we went to house with the village census, and we basically asked questions in the line of दिदी तपाईले कोसँग धेरै कुरा गर्नुहुन्छ, कोसँग पैसा चाहियो भने कोसँग borrow गर्नुहुन्छ. So along these lines, we had these questions, and we formed this network map on the basis of this question. So this diagram that you see is basically each dot here is a person in the village, is a woman in the village, and if I name another person as my friend, there is a link between us. So this line that you see is basically, if I say that X is my friend, I have a link between X. So this is an undirected network in the sense only one person has to say that the other person is my friend. So on the basis of the network survey, we formed this network map for each village. So we had 19 of these network maps. And on the basis of these network maps, we conducted our field experiment. Okay, so let me move on to what exactly...
Can I ask you one thing?
Yeah, sure.
So when you talk about forming a group, for example, if you form one group or multiple groups, let us say, is it like the members of the group, are they confined within the village, or you can take a members from across the villages as well? I mean, 2 villages, a group member, whether they come from 2 villages, can they come from 2 villages, or they are from within 1 village?
They're from within 1 village.
Okay.
So yeah. So I'm going to explain more on the group formation. But so the first step was we did this network survey, and on the basis of that, so we separated what we call the role of monitor candidates. So we assigned 2 people the role of monitors. In particular, we assigned somebody who is very central in the village and not very central in the village. So what we call high central H and low central L. So what do I mean by centrality? In simple terms, centrality is just power of my influence. So somebody who is high central would have many friends who have many friends. So I'm well known in the village, whereas somebody who's low central is not very well known in the village. So in each of these villages, so we had 19 villages, so we had 19 high central monitors and 19 low central monitors, one for each village. And so we really wanted to sort of see the contrast in demand between these two extreme types of monitor, because one is somebody who's well known and one is somebody who's not very known in the society. So what do people vote for? Who do people vote for, and who do people want as monitors? Okay, so I come to group formation. This goes back to the question by Nirmalji. So the groups were limited to one village. So given the network map of that village, we formed groups of 3, where we sampled people who are not very central, more so. And so we had a dense group, which was people who knew each other very well, and sparse group is where people didn't know each other very well. So in particular, in network terms, what does it mean to be dense? So if you look at this, a snapshot of the village network, so this person who is circled in green, the people circled in red would be the dense group, and the people circled in blue would be the sparse group. So note that they are in the same village, but just that people circled in red, the dense group, are people who I'm more close with, whereas people circled in blue are people who I don't know very well. So this is the group formation strategy, and we want to see that how does this person circled in green behave differently when she is with people circled in red versus when she's with people circled in blue, basically.
And excuse me, like, do you give them the names? Do you ask them the names, whether you know him or not, or something like that, or you just randomly ask him or her, the respondent, whether he knows someone who is close to him or her?
So in the network survey, we didn't give them options. We randomly asked them who are the 3 closest friends. Who are your 3 closest friends? Who do you borrow money from, and so on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so once we form these groups, we come to the experiment design. So on the basis of these groups, we invited each of these women over phone for the experiment. And the experiment were typically in a school early in the morning. We gathered all these women together, and also the women who we had assigned the roles of monitor. And so there are various components to the experiment. There's going to be a voting, and then there's going to be this determination of institution. Are you going to be playing with the monitor of your choice versus the monitor that is exogenously assigned? And then there is going to be this contribution and monitoring. So I'm going to be explaining each of these aspects in detail next. But just to make sure that we are on the same page, each of these women, so there are groups of 3, and each of these women are going to be playing twice. Once in a group that they know, dense group, which they've said that they know, and once in a group which is sparse for them. And within this group, they are first going to be interacting with somebody who is endogenous with a monitor which they choose, and once with a monitor that we assign them. So on an average, they play a total of 4 rounds. So at the end of the experiment, basically, we gave them money for their participation, which was around 220 rupees. Okay, so what is the contribution game? So this is really central part of our design. It's a simple public good game, which we often use in experimental economics, where the idea is we give each of these women 10 tokens each. So this is how we explain the game to the women. You'd be given 10 tokens each. The value of 1 token is 10 rupees. And all that you need to decide in this game is how much money you want to put in the public pot versus how much money you want to keep for yourself. So in the natural public good scenario, and we told them that whatever amount they contribute to the public pot would be increased in value by 50% and distributed equally irrespective of the initial contribution. So in this case, we see that the person in blue with blue tokens contributed 1, whereas the green tokens contributed more. But at the end of the day, they ended up with equal number of tokens from the public pot, irrespective of the initial contribution. So this was key that our participants understood this. And then this was, we told them that given that you're playing this contribution game, do you then want to elect a monitor? So they could see each other. So they were in the same room, so they knew exactly who they were playing with. So once they knew who they were playing this game with, we told them, so would you like to vote for a monitor? In particular, if you would like to vote for a monitor, would you like to vote for a monitor who is central? So we just gave them their names. Would you like to vote for Sita Gopali, or would you like to vote for Sushmita Gopali? So we just gave them two options, basically random, which was determined by the network survey, which was the central one and the not central monitor. And so once people voted, the voting was private. It was private information. And once they voted, if the monitor was chosen, the monitor would come into the room and observe sort of how much money was contributed by each person, and see what the total contribution was by each of them, basically. And so the role of this monitor is really, in this case, to observe the contribution game. So the monitor does not punish in this scenario, but just simply observes the contribution of each of the participants. So the idea is that, given that I observe exactly how much you've been contributing, how do I then behave? And so we hypothesize that this need for the monitor is going to vary across dense and sparse groups, whereas in dense groups, people are going to be very familiar with each other, hence they contribute without a monitor, whereas in sparse groups, because you don't know so well, then you might try to free ride on the other. So before I move on to the results, I'm just going to quickly summarize to give you a better idea of the context. So these were women who were on an average had 3 years of education, so they were primary school dropouts, and on an average they had 10 friends. So this was a very dense network that we're talking about. And then if you look at the voting behavior, there was variation across women. So there were some women who behaved in the same manner irrespective of which group they were in, whereas some women voted in a different way. So in particular, if you look at these diagrams, most people voted for having a no monitor, but then there were some women who always voted for no monitor. So the blue here is people who always voted for no monitor. The orange here is people who always voted for a low monitor, and then the people in green are the people who always voted for a high central monitor. So you see that there is some amount of variation that is happening in terms of who people wanted as their monitors. Okay, so before I move on to the result, do we have any questions about the experimental design? Because this is really key to understanding the results. Do we have any clarification question on the design? No?
I do have a question.
These
monitors, are these monitors like within the group of 3, or are these monitors selected like for the all of the groups?
They're selected for all of the groups.
So this is like a monitor for all of the people who are there, right?
Correct, exactly.
Yeah.
So if you go back to the diagram, the monitor is somebody who is external to the group, who is assigned for the village, basically.
Right.
Okay. Okay, so let me move on to the results then. So the first set of results look at the choice of the monitor, and then the second set of results are going to focus on the contribution game. So if you look at monitor choice, so the blue color is going to be showing you what is happening in the sparse groups, whereas the orange color is going to be showing you what is happening in dense groups. So in sparse groups, you see that there are some people who are voting for no monitor, but there are more people in the dense group who are choosing to not be monitored. In particular, if you look at this high central monitor group, you see that there are substantially more people in the sparse group who choose to be monitored by a high central person rather than in the dense group. And so we sort of reinforce this with a logit regression. So we had a multi-logit regression where we take no monitor as the baseline option, and we look at how this option sort of impacts my my choice depending on which group I am in. So G is a dummy for the group, and I also control for the characteristics of the group, so including caste, age, education, and then we have round fixed effects. So we see here that for the low central monitor, there's not much happening, but when you come to the high central, the choice of the high central monitor, there are substantially more people who choose to be monitored by a high central person compared to than in sparse group. Compared to than in dense groups. So you see that there are people in dense groups who do not want to be monitored more frequently than in sparse groups. So in line with our hypothesis, there are more people who want to be monitored when they are in a group that is closely knit. So in a group that is not very closely knit. So if I don't know you very well, I feel the need to be monitored. And then to look at contribution in exogenous rounds. So this is a clean case where there is no endogeneity in the setting, where we are exogenously assigning one of the monitor options. And we see that in sparse group in particular, contribution increases in the presence of a high central monitor by 15 percentage points. It increases by 7.4 rupees. And whereas in dense groups, there is not much of an effect happening. So this is when you have randomly assigned a monitor. But now we want to compare, which is really the heart of this project, is to compare what happens when you have a randomly assigned monitor versus you get to choose your own monitor. So in the scenario where you get to choose your own monitor, I want you to first focus on the group where they choose a no monitor, and then look at the group which chooses a high central monitor. So if you look at groups that chose no monitor in this case, so the blue is going to be where the monitor was assigned randomly, and the red in this case is where the monitor is chosen by the group. So as you can see here, there's not much happening in the dense group, but in the sparse group, in the group where people don't know each other very well, allowing people to choose their own monitor, even if they are not monitored in this case, increases contribution substantially. So here there's an increase in the contribution. And again, so if you want to quantify this, it's 21.9% of the mean. And for the scenario where they choose a high central monitor, contribution increases in sparse groups again, which is 8.6% of the mean. So there's, again, not much happening in the dense groups, but the effect of choosing your own monitor is really coming from the sparse group. So what we call endogenous institution in this setting is basically choosing your own monitor increases your level of cooperation in sparse groups. And so now I'm going to be presenting the empirical strategy. So we reinforce these results with a simple regression where we control for group level characteristics, and we have individual fixed effects. So this is a fixed effect regression, and we look at endogenous. So the dummy here looks at endogenous group versus a group that is endogenous monitor versus exogenous monitor assigned. So here we see that the effect is really in the sparse group, whereas in the dense group there's not much effect. So the fact that you are allowed to choose your monitor increases cooperation in sparse groups, statistically significant. Now, another way to look at this would be to say, given that the monitor that you chose is only revealed in the endogenous case, what happens when I reveal this, like, because voting is private, so what happens when I reveal what the group has chosen? So in the scenario now, we're going to look at contribution in both endogenous and exogenous case, and we see that again in the dense group there is some sort of effect that is happening. So if I reveal to the group that a no monitor has been chosen, contribution increases in both dense and sparse groups across both rounds. Whereas if I do that when a high central monitor is chosen, so this is the interesting bit where there is some sort of a signaling happening when I have when I reveal this information on who is chosen as the monitor, contribution decreases for the dense group when I reveal who is chosen as a monitor. So there's here a discrepancy between what is happening in the dense group and sparse group. So the earlier effects you saw was only limited to the sparse groups, whereas here you see that something is happening even in the case of dense group. When you reveal, there's some sort of signaling happening with the revelation of who the monitor is. Okay, again, we reinforce this with a simple OLS regression. And we see that the impact of revealing the choice of the group is stronger in the dense group rather than in the sparse group, given that dense groups have already a certain level of trust within their groups. So I'm going to give you a window into what sort of mechanisms we think is driving this these set of results. So firstly, we strictly want to look at the reinforcement of reputation concern here, because the monitor did not have the power to impose any fines. So the monitor was only observing your actions. So why the monitor then? So why is there's increase in cooperation when you get to choose your own monitor versus when it's randomly assigned? So we hypothesize that this is really because of reputation concern, that because you care about your reputation of a monitor that you have yourself chosen, there's an increase in cooperation. And it could also be that it sort of compensates for weak reciprocity within groups which don't know each other very well. So that's one of the mechanisms that we think is driving the results. And in order to understand this mechanism more in detail, we have a small theoretical model to understand exactly what is happening. So before I move on to the model, do we have any questions with regards to the results? No? Okay, so we're good with the results. So I move on to the theoretical model, which is a little intensive in, going to be intensive in maths, but I'm trying to present it more precisely and succinctly. So first, how do we look at this contribution decision? So we say that contribution is going to be modeled with my level of altruism. So where I can either be somebody who is very altruist, alpha H, or somebody who is not very altruist. So when I mean altruist, it's how much I care about the other person, basically. And in addition to my level of altruism, I also am going to be affected by what I believe about the other's level of altruism, which I model here with mu 0I. So in line with the literature, I believe that there are more people who are altruist in the dense group compared to the sparse group. And so my actual level of altruism is going to be a function of both how much I care about the person, but also how much I think the person cares about me. So in line with psychological games. And then we're going to be modeling the effect of the monitor via reputation concerns in the spirit of gossip literature. So there's this paper by Banerjee et al. That looks at how people talk in the villages, the sort of information flow that happens, and hence I'm afraid of the monitor. And so in our scenario, we model that with the probability of being reported. In particular, so this is a simple utility function where the first part is the utility function from a public good game, and then this is the cost of the monitor. And so this part is what we introduce is effect from having a monitor. So the idea is that if I contribute beyond a certain threshold, the monitor is going to think bad of me and is going to spread rumors, or going to spread information about how I behaved in this game, basically. And so in particular, we model this with a parameter theta, where theta we say is uniformly distributed. So think of it as a sort of a social norm where you're at least supposed to contribute to that level. And then we have what I just mentioned before, that is how much I care about the other person is a function of how altruist I am and how I think how much the other person cares about me. So this is the function here, and this is the utility of the other person. So it's a product of both my level of altruism and what I think about the other person. And so on the basis of this utility function, we're trying to understand what makes sense when I'm in a dense group and when I'm in a sparse groups. Should I vote for a monitor? Is my utility higher when I vote for a monitor versus when I have not voted for a monitor? And so we're going to be looking at separating equilibrium of the form where beyond a certain level, I want to vote for a monitor, whereas within a certain level of altruism, I believe that there is no need to vote for a monitor. So we solve this utility function and maximize it with respect to contributions, and we establish exactly what we're looking for, that there is this threshold beyond which I don't feel the need to be monitored, because I know that I care about this person, the other person cares about me, so why waste money in being monitored, because the choice of the monitor is costly. You pay to have the monitor. And so this is sort of replicating our empirical results. And then we also have the same results about when you're monitored by an endogenous monitor, your contribution increases versus when you're not being monitored by an endogenous monitor. So this is a small model which reiterates what we have established from our empirical findings. Okay, so before I conclude, do we have any questions on the model? No, or I'm going to take questions at the end of the presentation. So let me then conclude. I think I'm dot on time. So the bigger picture, what do I want you to take away from this project is sort of to say that people know what is good for them. If you allow them to choose their own monitors, they do choose monitors if they are in groups that they don't trust, if they are in sparse groups, what we call sparse groups, compared to in a group which is very closely knit. And then giving them this option of choosing their own monitor increases contribution more so in a sparse group. And then there can also be some additional information that is being disclosed by just revealing who was chosen as a monitor. And this has implications for community-based organizations in a real-world setting, and which could inform policy making. And so we have several follow-up projects with the network data that we collected that gives really a good account of what is going on into the village. So one of the projects, like Koginduji mentioned, is on increasing aspirations of women, and then the other one is on adoption of cook stores. So I think I end here, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you so much. So this is a picture of us in the field.
One quick question on the experiment.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So one of the assumptions is that they act in terms of like if their reputation will be harmed for them contributing less when there's a monitor, right? Mm-hmm. So during the period of the was that reputation harm a matter of expectation, or there were cases where actually there was gossip going around during the experiment, which could have directed their behavior, not just in terms of expectation, but in terms of reality.
So I think it was in our experiment, it was in terms of expectation that outside the field, so not in the field, in the experiment per se, because in the experiment people were busy doing this contribution game, so not in the experiment per se, but outside later on this might sort of fuel a certain kind of conversation. And so in order to more iterate on this mechanism, we went back to the field and we asked the women, why did you choose somebody who is more central versus, a random person? And there they seem to say that, with a more central person, there's a higher probability that the information gets circulated in the village. So they did sort of seem to have this this mechanism in mind, but not
right.
In the field per se.
Was there a way where you ensured that that sort of reputational harm did not happen during the course of the experiment?
So definitely there was no conversation within the participants during the course of the experiment. So there was not much information that was going out. It was more about the experiment, right. And once they did the experiment, they left the premises. So there wasn't much communication.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Juni ji, for your wonderful presentations. And we all are well acquainted with some innovative experimental design. So I hope every one of us learns a lot from our presentation. So if you have any queries, either you ask directly or you have sent it through in our chat box, we'll ask that question to Juni Ji. Then if anyone wants to ask any question, please could you...
Can I help you with this?
Okay, sure, Nirmal sir.
So there are a few questions in the chat box. There is one question about whether the survey participants and the experiment participants are they the same? Are they the same? So this is just a clarificatory question, I suppose.
Yeah, they're the same, because we did the experiment on the basis of the survey, so it was the same women.
Okay, thank you. And the other question that pops out in the chat box is about why women enumerator are not likely to add confounding factor in the network elicitation. So can I repeat that? Should I repeat that again?
No, I got it. So definitely there's always this, enumerator effect, but we wouldn't be worried so much about the enumerator effect with the network elicitation, because, these were women these were enumerators that you didn't know so very, very well. So, I mean, when I ask you who are your friends, there is no way that the fact that the enumerators are present would bias your answers.
So are there any more questions?
Can I jump in here?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So these women enumerators they are basically the women within the same society, and these are women within the same network, or these are like really different enumerators?
So the enumerators, not within the same network, but they're from close by villages.
Close by.
So they're local enumerators. They're local enumerators, but so your worry is that if you have these women elicit their networks, then it's going to bias their answers, right? Which would give us a different network versus when a random person goes and asks them. So I think to these women, these enumerators who were from neighboring villages were pretty much a random person. So it shouldn't affect the network elicitation in any way.
Is there any way that you can run some sort of like Fisher exact test to look at your results, because you are just regressing, like this is basically OLS regression, right, on the data you have? And my worry is because you just go and get the data on the network and you have all these, n by n matrices of the data set. What if, you run some sort of Edwards-Rene random network and try to find those random networks and rerun your result to the simulated network versus what you have? And then I would look at the difference of those simulated network versus what you have. And I would look at the differences between that as a result of your beta coefficient rather than just the OLS, because can you really, regress your results with the things, that comes from like a different process. Like network is not like any other variables, right? It is
correct. It's highly endogenous.
Each other, and the information circulation, how it happens is, even if you take the Bonacci centrality, there's like not just a one round of information happening. Like it takes like all the infinitum rounds of information spillover, and then you're gonna take the that spillover effect on your regression, right? So I'm a little worried about the endogeneity that itself is inside the process. So I just wanted to look at how the result you have versus the simulated result you could get from the Edwards-Rene, network simulation. And if there is really some effect, then that would be a very strong indication for your results. That's going to be Fisher-Sharp test, and you have a really high power to say that, okay, whatever we are seeing is actually we are seeing in the world. It's not just like for the chance I'm seeing all this start in my regression. Just a thought on that.
True. So I think the only problem with this is because I agree that networks are highly endogenous objects, and there's a lot of things that are going within the village. There's sort of a black box, and we try to cleanly dissect some aspect of this black box with the experiment. And the problem with running a random simulated network and trying to run our results is basically because we are really looking at the behavior of the women as a function of the network. So because we are making them playing this contribution game. So if you simulate the network, we'd also have to simulate the contribution game, and you know, so that wouldn't really bring a clear-cut answer, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, in a way that should not. So one more thing, like how about generalization? Because this is just running for this is small village. I think 19 different villages, right? Can you, for an example, can you say run this experiment with like 13 villages and then put the remaining villages to test a result? And can you get the same result out? Can it be generalizable?
So for sure, we could do that. We could sort of scale this up and do it in like additional village. But I would say that the results are very much generalizable given a similar setting context where people know each other well, where there's some sort of information exchange that is happening through the networks.
Okay. And the final thing is like how, as a policymaker, how should I take this information and rethink about some of the policies that we want, say, for some sort of like small village funding or schooling. Is there any way we can use this information of network on designing some of the policy or enforcing some of the policies?
So I think the key takeaway from this is villagers know what is good for them and what is not. So instead of trying to impose a third random monitor, generally in these cases they impose like an external person from the funding organization who comes and oversees the project and sees if it's working in a certain manner. So instead of doing that, they could give the responsibility of monitoring to the villagers themselves. And of course, depending on the scale of the project, I mean, we're talking about really like a small scale project. So that wouldn't work for a large infrastructure project, for instance. Given a similar setting and they could give the opportunity to the villagers to elect their own monitoring institution, and that could actually work pretty well to enforce cooperation rather than having like an external person being paid to monitor them.
I'll ask you one more question, but let Resum sir to go with his question. Resum sir, back to you.
Right. Thank you, Nirmalji. Thank you, Nirmalji. Juni ji, it was nice presentation. We expected. It is like a very fine-tuned methodology and everything. And my concern would be a little bit more applied side only. In one of the findings is in your paper mentions, and even you presented there, says that the findings suggest that monitoring should be catered to the needs of the community, right? Somewhere we conclude that way. And what I understood from this is like, is we are experimenting this indigenous institutions, then in a society, a community with those, our sample with those women, then we have other type of institutions as well. So, the institution we created, it works for the society, and how it is organized, how indigenously, how women are organized, that's there. Your methodology is very convincing there, nothing to worry about it. But my query would be, then explaining your findings a little bit further, would you just, just clarify what is the implication of it in vis-a-vis other types of institutions are also there. Whatever the institution we created or our experimental design created, then the society, the women, the group does not confine to that institution in the day-to-day economic and social activities as such. So to reflect the productivity or de facto and de jure productivity of the quality of the institution you created, how it complies with the other kind of institutions and really help let's say that kind of individual, like women in your case, but in that kind of local individuals to have better, any economic decision makings in the future or in the days to come, then how the institution you created really, cope up with or really complement with other kind of institutions. Can you a little bit explain in this line, please?
Mm-hmm. So definitely that's food for thought to sort of look at. Okay, so these are the community-based institutions that we're talking about in this particular setting, and our findings are very much limited or applicable to this form of institution. But yeah, of course, there is these other formal institutions like the provincial government, the local government, that are interacting day to day with these local endogenous in institutions. So in terms of how we could apply this to the bigger picture, so I don't really have a clear-cut answer to that, because this still needs to be looked at and studied more in detail. But I would say that our finding is sort of is helping improve one aspect of the institution. And then we can sort of try to look at what the complementarities and substitutes are from a more formal institution, let's say from a local institution, or like how can the local government intervene and so on and so forth. So we have this project with the aspiration project. We are planning to do that with the local government. So probably there we would answer some part of your concerns. But as of now, I don't have a clear-cut answer to how we could do that.
Thank you.
I have another question. If there's time, can I? Yeah.
Sure.
So yeah. So one of the ideas is that this experiment was run in a place where the institutions are weak, right? At least that's the assumption. Are there any experiments of similar nature that's been done where the institutions are much stronger? And if and if that's the case, then how does the result compare with those two kind of institutions, with weak institutions and strong institutions? And if there's not been that sort of research, can you hypothesize what sort of conclusion we'd get in a more formal and strong institution?
Mm-hmm. So again, this is a little outside from the scope of what we do, because we really focus on like what is happening with in the case of a developing country where local communities are very active. But if you look at places, a developed country where you have strong institutions, so then these mechanisms are very different, because people no longer rely on each other so much. There is social benefit, there's unemployment benefit, so you always have this formal support. And as a result of which you don't need to rely on your society or your friends and family so much. So that sort of cuts down the main mechanism that we're after. So in that setting, you're of course you're concerned about what your friends think about you, but not so much to the extent that you might change your behavior as a function of what they would think about you. So that way we need to think of an alternative mechanism that could sort of look at monitoring with these strong institutions. But definitely it's a different scenario context altogether. And I'd have to look at more in detail about the context and do research in that area for really understanding the crux of why these two situations are different, besides the fact that the mechanisms are different.
I have one more question. Juni, can I go ahead?
Yeah, sure.
So one thing that, like you said, like when there's no formal institution, and then these groups, whether sparse or dense, they're trying to have the information in a way to spill over that is much more, I think, faster or better than what we do not have, the institution, right? Mm-hmm. For an example, let's say each of this person are better than a coin flip. Then this, whatever you assume that works, because at the long run, let's say you have like 10 people on your network, and they are doing everything in the democratic process, depending upon the sparsity or how much they are connected, they can do all sort of this voting. But just imagine each of this person has capacity to make the decision that is less than 50% correctly. Then by very definition of yourselves, like we should let these communities to make decisions just take the binomial theorem. You have like 10 people, you have to make the majority to get the voting, like 6 people. Each have probably less than 50%. Then what end up is a very deadweight loss situation where they are indeed making up, not a correct decision, right? So that has also kind of an implication on your result, because when you say these institutions, this informal institution matter, but what if each person in this informal institution is making, less than a coin flip correct decision? Do you have any thought on it? I mean, this is just like a purely hypothesized, a scenario. But I think when you talk about the network, then because of this spillover, this can have a unique implication of deadweight loss as well.
True. So definitely, I think the consequences of this very much depend on the scale of the project that we are referring to. So here it's so when you talk about forest user groups or poverty funds, they are really at the level of the village, really at the level of the community, where people get to decide how it's going to be done, and they have the sort of independence in deciding how things work. Whereas, I mean, of course, in a scenario where it's not you that is directly involved, but somebody else is doing the work, and you're just electing a monitor, I think in that scenario, we would be more worried about the deadweight loss. Whereas in a scenario where I myself am super involved in maybe protecting the trees, or be it assigning funds to people, then I feel more accountable in a sense. And then, so really like giving the property right hypothesis of public good game. And so I'm more accountable, and I sort of then make, even though it's a coin flip decision, but I make some sort of effort to do the right decision in some sense. Well, I mean, but I agree. I mean, if in a scenario where it does not really concern me, so that's primarily why it becomes important to look at, to make it more context specific to the type of project that we're referring to.
All right. And one more question: is this
maybe we should ask others as well? We should let others to ask questions. So if we have time at the end of the session, we'll be happy to offer you again the floor. So are there any questions that you would like to ask other participants, audience, students, faculties? So in the meantime, maybe I can ask you something about your presentation. So this is a one-shot game, right? So it is played once and all.
Correct.
So suppose like it is a two-shot game, or let us say it is a repeated game, and you have same, the participants, right? You have the previously assigned monitor, whether endogenous or exogenous, right? They play the game again, but start with new sort of initial endowments, right?
Okay.
Do you think that your the analysis or your findings would change in that context if it is a two-shot game, or let us say repeated game with same participants? Everything is the same. Now you have the same exogenous monitor that you assigned in the first place, in the first shot, right? So what I'm trying to point out is that, like in the initial game, they don't know that monitor, right? For example, if we are talking about an exogenous monitor, they are not aware about that monitor. It does not know who that monitor is, right? So that is the issue. But in the course of time, you get to know that monitor, right? You go along good with that monitor. You understand each other better, right? So do you think that in the second game, if the game is repeated, for example, the amount of contribution maybe might change than what you had in the first place? What is your opinion about this? Did you get my point?
Yeah, I did. So definitely, there's this aspect of repeated game versus one-shot game, and we did think about like making this a repeated interaction. But with respect to so I think I should clarify one point about the exogenous monitor. So these exogenous monitors, they were the same people that we assigned the endogenous monitor role. So they were people from the village, people who they knew very well. So,
but the groups are different, right? To whom you assign the same person exogenously or endogenously? I mean,
they are the same group. The same group plays twice. Once with the endogenous monitor,
okay,
and once with the exogenous monitor.
Okay.
So definitely in that terms, in getting used to the exogenous monitor, that would not be the case because they already know these people. And in spite of this, we see this difference in endogenous and exogenous, which we find interesting. But definitely if you move from a one-shot game to a more repeated game, so you have a longer timeline idea of like how things evolve, it would we'd have to sort of study what the implications of this are in a repeated game. So I'm not very sure how our results would change if we make this repeated. And generally in public good games, you see that as you repeat the game more, contribution goes down even more and more. That's what the experimental literature says. But in our scenario, I'm not very sure what would happen if we shift this to a repeated scenario.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So are there any questions? If there are no questions, then Shishirji, you can ask your question again. Shishirji, are you there?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, you can ask a question, and maybe your question would be the last question for today's session.
I'm good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, okay.
Appreciate that.
Shishirji, you are going to ask the question.
I said I'm good. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe I can ask one, like, just to close it off. Is that okay? And so one thing that I thought of when I was listening about the sparsely connected group. So historically, if you look at the rural areas of Nepal, the hilly parts of Nepal, then you have these individuals who are living in like hilltops, right? This is just like something that seems very related to the thing, but then it has a historical implication. So it might be interesting to think it over with you. So we had this like from the place that I came from, you had this people who are living in the hilltops, and they have only one house, and they sort of look after their farmlands on that particular hill, and then there's another hill, there's another house, so very sparsely populated, right? So do you think that sort of living has some implication for how we do network analysis in more of a historical context, how they interacted, and like how they would choose their probably monitors in that sort of setting.
So for sure, so we did this in the hills, and if we go to the Tarai region, we're sure that we're going to get a different kind of network, probably more dense, because hills are more separated from each other. But I think one interesting thing about the network in our villages was that everybody knew everybody. So at the end of the day, even though like we were far away from each other, so we had to go via, let's say, 5 women to get to you, but we were still in the same component. So like the picture I showed you, everybody was connected. Whereas in the sparsely populated, the context that you mentioned, there would probably be the case that there is no connection between two components. So there's a component here and there's a component here, and there's nobody to connect these two groups. So of course, in that case, we'd have to work out how we define what a sparse group is, because I mean technically the distance between these two groups is now infinity, because there's nobody that is connecting them. So then we'd have to think of it accordingly, and of course it's going to have some
in the sense of how they choose their monitor, right?
Exactly. So because I mean now not everybody, so it's not very clear who's central anymore, because these are two components which are not very well connected. So we need to accordingly change our definitions and see how we deal with this situation.
Right.
And
so
I think
that sort of networks felt very similar to a study on, I forgot the author's name, but like Magaviri tribes or something like that. So I was reading a paper on that, where this like sparsely connected, how the merchants of Magaviri tribes, they were they would impose certain sort of reputational harms, and this sort of gives in terms of how.
It's by grief. The paper is by grief. It's one of the papers that were super interesting and sort of motivated this work on how what motivates the importance of reputation in general, especially in Nepali society. We know like people are very concerned about the social image, about society sort of attitude. So that
paper we felt very promising in terms of how we can use in Nepal, because my grandfather was a merchant who used to trade in very long distances, and for that reason I just felt interesting to share that.
Khagendra sir,
I think
now I think if there are no more questions, then I think you should proceed towards closing the session. So Naveen sir, do you have something to say?
No, really interesting paper. I don't have anything to ask in particular, but really interesting and very nicely, finely designed experiment. And so that is really helpful for our faculty as well as the student. Okay, so we can really take the reference of your paper, and then that will give more idea about social networks and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me, and it has been a pleasure presenting and discussing the paper with you all.
Thank you, Juni.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, especially Juni. Thank you so much, and all of the participants. We are very grateful to you, and we hope we'll again see you all in the next seminar. Okay, thank you so much. We are already crossing our time, so once again, I would like to thank everyone and see you. So, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Juni. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.